Hi, I want to welcome you back to Undertaking Cinema. Today we have a great show. We've got a special guest, Nicholas Pike, who's a tremendous composer. I've worked with him on numerous projects, including Parasomnia and Tales from the Crypt and so forth, but he's also done a lot of great work in the genre and otherwise. Nicholas, welcome. I want to thank you for being here. It's a great honor to have you here.
That's really nice to be here. It's good to hang out.
So today we're going to be talking about musical scoring for films and what a composer does and how you go about it. So, but first, look, Nicholas, give us a little background on how you got started and what your first jobs were.
Yeah, I mean, I started off young. You know, my mother sent me to this choir school in England when I was 7 because she thought I had some musical ability. And, you know, I had to play 2 instruments there in addition to singing, and so I played the piano and the flute. And then, you know, so I was in choirs for quite a long time, and then when I was a teenager in South Africa, I had this flute teacher, this elderly lady, and she died. And so a new principal flautist came to the orchestra there, and he was a young German guy. So I started studying with him, and he was really cool. He, you know, because I was playing jazz and rock and classical music at the same time. And he said, look, you know, if you'll, you know, your jazz stuff sounds really cool, really great, but I think we could work on your technique. And he said, if you work on it, I will bring you into the orchestra to sub for the second flautist, who was an elderly guy who was sick a lot, you know. And so that was like a turning point of a moment, because I kind of learned what an orchestra sounds like from sitting in the middle of it, and it was amazing. You know, it was an amazing experience. So then I went to school in Boston for 4 years, and I was still just wanted to be a player mostly, even though I always composed for whatever band I had. So I went 4 years in Boston, then I moved to New York and was doing the same thing there, and you know, I had good bands with really good people, but I couldn't make a living from it because the music was not, you know, everybody's cup of tea. So I decided to focus more on composing, and so I did a couple of sort of commercials for some friends who were in that business, and then I was working as a waiter in this restaurant down the village. And this South African playwright, Athol Fugard, walked in one day, and he was somebody I knew well because he would put on his plays in this underground theater in South Africa, and I used to perform at the same theater. So he came in and he's like, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, you know, Mel Brooks is producing a movie of one of my plays, and you know, I want you to do the music." I was like, "Okay." So. You know, to cut a long story short, the movie never got made because the two of them, both pretty bullheaded, couldn't agree on a director they both wanted to work with. So they ended up just shooting it on stage. But meanwhile, I'd written some themes for this thing, and I thought, well, maybe I could make this into a suite and have it recorded. Again, to cut a long story short, I was thinking I had a friend with a studio. I thought, well, I'll bring musicians in and overdub violinists and cellists and whatever. When this guy said to me, you know, you can hire the London Symphony Orchestra for $3,000. I was like, wow, that's great. But, you know, I've only got $20 in my bank account. So, but, you know, it got me thinking. And at this same restaurant I used to work in, this couple used to come in, and the wife was a patron of the arts. The husband was a Wall Street honcho, and they'd always ask me, "So what are you doing? What's going on?" And so at this moment, I said, "Well, I'm thinking I want to record this suite with the London Symphony Orchestra," and they were like, "Oh, but I need money to do it." And so they said, "Well, why don't you come over to the Brownstone after you finish work and let's talk about it?" So I went over there. You know, so the guy was all business. He's, you know, I'm thinking he's going to say, you know, "Hey kid, here's a few grand. Is that enough?" But no, he said, "How much do you need?" I said, "Like $3,000. And he said, "Well, when can you pay it back?" I was like, I didn't know what to say. I said, 6 months? So he said, fine. So that was kind of the start of the composing career, because I'd written this suite, I orchestrated it for 60 pieces, flew over to London, conducted the London Symphony Orchestra on my 30th birthday at Abbey Road in the big room. And, it was at a point where I thought, if I have to get out of music right now, it's okay, because I've got something to show for it, for the last however many years, 15, 20 years I've been in it. But stuff started coming out of the woodwork. A friend had a friend who was working with John Borman on a film, and he needed somebody to orchestrate and conduct for him.
So, Nicholas, could you explain the difference between a conductor, an orchestrator, and a composer?
Yeah, so composing is actually writing the actual music, the fundamental of the music, the melody, the harmony, the rhythms, basically. Now, orchestration is taking that piece and spreading it out over an entire orchestra, or whatever the group is, big band. It's spreading it out over that entire instrumentation of, 60, 70, 80, 90 people,
So what was your first feature film or television project that you did?
It's actually a feature film called Graveyard Shift.
Oh, yeah.
And it was funny because, I got a call from this friend who used to be a flute student of mine, a Brazilian guy. And he said, "Oh, Nick, you got to meet this friend of mine. He's got a movie. He needs score for it." I was like, "Oh, okay." I had low expectations, and so this producer invited me to a screening, like a test screening. And, so there wasn't really any temp music in it, and, how they used to hand out cards afterwards. Maybe they still do, hand out cards and ask you questions. I couldn't think of one positive thing to say about this film. All I could think of was, I got to get out of here, because, this is not what I want to be doing. So a couple of days went by, and this producer calls me. He says, "So what did you think of the film?" I was like, "Well, it was interesting." And he said, "Well, I got $20,000 if to score the film. Would you like to do it?" And I was like, $20,000. This is like 1985. And I was like, "Oh, that could bankroll a move to LA for me, and set me up for a year or so, So I said, "Well, sounds good. Love to do it." So he literally pulls out a manila envelope with us $10,000. He says, "Here's some money to get you started. We'll give you the rest when you're done." I was like, "Wow, okay." So that was the first film, and it was a pretty fun experience. And I wrote a couple of songs for it as well, which was sung by a guy called, I'm not going to remember his name now. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, he ended up being the lead singer for Journey after Steve Perry left. And so he was singing for them for about 10, 15 years or something.
Now, I think when we first met, it was on Tales from the Crypt. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it was on Only Skin Deep. So I did one of the worst things that you could do to a composer. I had done a temp track, and I had turned it in to the producers, and they fell in love with it. And then I had to hand it off to you. And, so tell us how that is, how it is to have to deal with that.
It's difficult, it can be difficult for sure. Sometimes it can be helpful, because it gives you a direction of, where everybody likes the music going, kind of thing, But, the more the director, the producers hear it, the more they get enmeshed in it, and it's very difficult. I mean, everybody's the same. It's not just directors and producers. I'm the same way. If I hear something to a picture and I've heard it many, many times, I try and listen to something else, and it just takes you right out of it because you're so used to what was there before, Interestingly enough, I don't remember it being a problem, Bill. So so don't fret about it. I do remember it was very had a very specific sound, which with like Tibetan bells and stuff like that, which I was happy to emulate and do something similar, you know.
So let's talk a little bit about when you get hired on a project. I know that sometimes you get hired before the film's made, but that's not usually the case, right?
It's pretty rare, you know. I mean, unless it's, you know, something, often if it's the director I've done multiple projects with, they will more often than not send me a script to look at, you know, before he's even started doing anything. You know, suggesting or thinking it's a good idea so I can start thinking about music. But for me, it's not a good thing because, you know, what my mind conjures up, you know, in terms of picture is usually different to what the final picture ends up being. So it's sort of, I get thrown off course there, you know. So I like to come in when there's something of a picture there to look at and really get a sense of what's going on.
Now, when you first see the film, tell us a little about what your process is. I mean, analyzing it, and how do you come up with a score for it? What kinds of things do you think about?
Well, the first thing is like panic. Like, shit, there's a lot of music in it. But then, you know, once I calm down, you know, and once I sit down with the director and we go through it and we figure out what all the cues are, where the music's going to be, usually at that point, you know, there may be like a certain scene that I think I'm going to start with that because that's going to set the tone pretty much for the entire film. You know, to talk about one of the films we've done together, like Parasomnia, the scene where the kid is giving the girl a bath and the rain's coming down on the skylight. I mean, that had such a powerful thing. It spoke to me immediately. So I was able to, like, the theme just came like that, you know.
Now, when we first started talking about Parasomnia, one of the things that we talked about was being thematic on it. And now some films are not thematic at all. Tell us a little bit about that and how you approach.
I'm big on themes, you know, especially melodic themes, but also just sort of sonic themes that can be repeated. Because if it's the right thing for the film, it's almost like you can put it anywhere and it feels right, you know. And so at that point, you're looking at, you know, different orchestration of it, or a different, you know, different sound evolvement of the piece to suit whatever's going on, you know. So, you know, usually I'll start with this scene that really speaks to me about the film, and then often just go back to the beginning and go chronologically through the film, you know, and work on each piece.
So now, do you come up with different themes for different characters, or how does that work?
I mean, not every character would have a theme necessarily, but certainly the major characters would have a theme. For instance, Parasomnia again, you know, Volp he had a theme. I mean, he had to have a theme. This is such a powerful entity in the film. And so you look to kind of play these themes throughout the film, and what's amazing about it is the power of suggestion. So once you've established a theme for somebody, you can hint at it later on, even if that person is not even in the scene, and it kind of, I think it pulls it gives the audience a trigger to that person's influence in the situation.
So I'm reminded of the film Jaws, which is so powerful. It's that dun, 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 dun. And it's because the shark is there even if you don't see the shark.
Right. Yeah, it's because it's a good example for sure. Yeah.
So do you sit down at a piano and compose, or how does that work?
Yes. Well, not so much on a piano. I have a keyboard and then playing a lot of sounds on the computer. And during the process, I might think, I could get a really interesting sound out of that instrument that would work nicely, so I'll record that and work that into the sound. And it's sort of probably like painting in a way. You find little things that kind of, when you put them all together, add up to something that's pleasing.
So when you started out, I believe you started out before there were emulators or digital synthesizers that could emulate orchestras and so forth. I mean, you had to use real instruments.
Yeah.
Now, I know you still do, but tell us how that was different.
So that, you're touching on the whole temp thing again at that point, because, one of the problems with temp is, they pick music from great music, great scores, and put it in the film. So one of the downsides is that, you're in this position that can take the creativity that you have to offer out of the equation, right? So one thing that back in the day when they didn't temp stuff was, until you got to the scoring stage, nobody really knew what this score was going to sound like. You could play it on the piano. You could say, here's the main theme. And I think, I don't know if I have this right, but what I heard was that when Spielberg went over to John Williams' house to hear that Jaws theme, he went away pretty disappointed. He thought, geez, I was kind of hoping for a bigger, grander theme than that. Not realizing that, once the orchestra had it and it was in the picture, how potent it was, So I remember the first job I did in Hollywood was for Alfred Hitchcock Presents, an episode of that. And so I was, writing everything in New York, and the director had no idea what the score was going to sound like until we walked on the scoring stage that day, I think it can be a pretty exciting moment, because you have no idea what's coming, and as long as it's kind of working with the picture, it's got to be, I would think, for a director, a really exciting moment to hear this personification of.
Now, I have to say, the first time I heard your score for Parasomnia, it blew me away, and it was like, oh my God, it's like a real movie now. It was great. Before that, it was just a bunch of rough stuff cut together.
Well, when I did that first job for that friend, the guy who had been working with John Boorman, I looked at the picture and it had no music, no new sound, just production sound on it. I was thinking, wow, this thing is a disaster, But after the score went on, it was like, "Ooh, wow, this is pretty good."
So let's talk a little bit about sound effects for score instead of using instruments. My film Fear.com, you used the sound effects as music, and it plays very much like a musical score.
I kind of like to do that. I like to sort of take an analog instrument of some sort, do strange stuff with it, and then process it in such a way that it's like ideally really cool and not recognizable as anything in particular. There's one sound from Fear.com I remember in particular, and it came from an instrument called a wind harp, which is kind of like a sound box with 4 strings on each side. And it's meant to sit in a window and have the wind, oscillate the strings and just make this really pleasing kind of drone, right? And so, of course, I didn't do that. I I did this scene where you could push on the string that, after it goes over the bridge and goes into the sound box, it's like a short piece of string, and where you could like hit the string and then press down on this thing, and it would just wow. And it was like, I think, great for those scenes in Fear.com.
So, Nicholas, are there films that you're particularly fond of the scores that you did for them? My films notwithstanding, of course.
Yeah, no, yours are definitely amongst. I mean, like we talked about before, Parasomnia is definitely a favorite of mine for sure. And I mean, on that one, we had the benefit of time, didn't we? I think I probably worked on that over the course of like a year, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's been a couple things. I was just talking to somebody the other day about this Michael Jackson video called Ghosts, which was this mega 35-minute video. We had a 90-piece orchestra and a choir, and I mean, it was an amazing experience, But then there have been others, like kind of family dramas, like completely away from what we usually do. Captain Ron was a really fun one.
So, Nicholas, were there films that you hated working on?
Yeah, not really, because I'm not into working like round the clock, one project to another. I like to sort of chill in between. So usually by the time the next project comes along, I'm kind of primed and, for whatever it is. And I mean, honestly, I can't really think of a project that I was thinking that was torture to work on,
Was there ever a project that, because of your particular musical spin, you just said, yeah, I don't know how to do this. This really isn't my thing?
No. I mean, I always think of, like for a film composer, you should be able to offer anything in any style, So I sort of, made it a point to like be able to adapt to whatever was called for in that situation,
So I remember one time I got this call from a company in India, and they sent me this script. And I remember reading the script going, I don't have the vaguest idea what's going on in this, And I mean, they would have like, get the characters in some terrible situation, and then suddenly some god would come down and go, oh, it's okay. And I just didn't understand it at all. It probably has to do with some sort of cultural differences or something. I don't know.
How do I write my way out of this? Oh, we'll have a god throw down a thunderbolt.
So Nicholas, tell us about some of the other directors and experiences that you've had.
I'll talk about you last, Bill. But early on, when I first started out in LA, I scored one of the first 3 Tales from the Crypt, which was with the late, great Dick Donner. A lovely guy, sweetheart of a guy. And so when I got the job, I spoke to his assistant, and she said, can you come over and meet with Dick at the studio? I was like, well, yeah. So I go over there, and he had this office that was huge and is full of, I don't know, all kinds of memorabilia and stuff. It was really, really amazing.
I liked the glass case on the wall that had the straitjacket in it and had a sign that said, "In case of emergency, break glass."
Yeah, I mean, that summed up Dick right there. You know? So I go in, and he says, "Hey, kid, come on in." So I go in, and he says, just want you to know that talking to a composer is the hardest thing in the world for me. So all I can suggest is you smoke some shit and see what you can come up with. I was like, great. But then, like Mick Garris, who I've done a lot of work with over the years, he usually has one word to give me that sort of sums up the vibe of the score and the vibe of the show. And the one that sticks in my head is when we did this mini-series of The Shining, the word that he said was, that would describe everything was dread. He said, like, if you keep the dread thing, as a part of the chemistry, that'll work. And then there's Bill Malone.
I think my only comment to you was there's no such thing as too weird.
No, it's close. What you said is, it can't be weird enough for me. Which is like brilliant, because it gives a composer a wide open canvas to do, almost anything.
Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there any last things you want to say to everybody out there? Any advice to struggling young composers?
Kind of a different world right now, just very different in so many ways. I guess I would encourage anybody coming along now to not to copy what other people are doing, because everybody's doing that, and the fact that all the sound libraries are accessible to everybody and everybody uses them has kind of watered down what music can be. So I guess I would encourage a young composer to find their own voice and record it in a way that they think is special, not what anybody else thinks is special or what somebody else is asking for because they don't know any better, but to really follow their idea of what would be really cool.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
And we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.